Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast. I'm your host, Sean, and this is part 6 of the Mike Tyson Career Profile. If you've been listening to the Mike Tyson series, well, it is a series, isn't it, guys? We've done so many episodes on him, it feels like a mini Mike Tyson series. If you've been listening to it, I hope you've enjoyed it. And here we are for part 6. Part 6 is going to focus on the aftermath of his victory over Tyrell Biggs. It's going to focus on Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, Buster Douglas, all the way up to around 1992. And then we will pause to go in to part 7 later down the line. Before I get into the episode and carry on the story of Mike Tyson's life, I just want to say thank you for everybody that's been listening to the podcast, that's been leaving reviews, that's been leaving ratings, that's been engaging across social media. All of that really helps us. Thank you so much for the support. A big thank you goes out to Hassan, who's been doing the script writing and research for the episodes. Thank you, Hassan, as always. Another great job, and I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you do enjoy this next part. So, without further ado, we're going to pick up where we left off. Mike Tyson has just beaten Tyrell Biggs, and the headline on October the 17th trumpeted the news. Tyson carves up Biggs to win in the 7th. The defeated manager, Lou Duva, solemnly read the eulogy. Tyrell Biggs lost confidence in the 2nd or 3rd round. He didn't quit in his heart, he quit in his head. On the sidelines, several interested spectators sought out the media. Larry Holmes, anticipating a title fight in the near future, spoke of the dirty tactics on the champion's part and threatened retaliation if the champion attempted to use those tactics on him. He said, "Tyson was dirtier than I've ever seen him. Whatever he does to me, I'll do back. He's going to think it's Hulk Hogan versus the Junkyard Dog." The Spinks-Lewis duo were visible and vocal as usual, trying to force Mike Tyson into a match. Jim Jacobs re-emphasised the champion's agenda. Michael Spinks is certainly in our future, but not our immediate future. He did propose a winner-take-all match between his fighter and Spinks, with the loser taking home $1 million and the winner getting the bulk of the purse, as much as $20 million. Michael Spinks quickly shrugged off that suggestion when he said, "What if I lose? I got to go home sad and poor too." As the renowned boxing historian Jim Jacobs saw it, Mike had to meet these two adversaries in the ring before he could take his rightful place alongside boxing's legends. First, he had to defend his crown successfully against the old guard Larry Holmes. Then he had to defeat Michael Spinks, the so-called People's Champion and Ring Magazine's heavyweight title holder. Jacobs, a stickler for the line of succession, admitted that Spinks won the true championship when he beat Larry Holmes for the IBF crown. Since Holmes' lineage could be traced back all the way to John L. Sullivan, in the manager's eyes, a champion can only lose his title in the ring, not have it stripped away by some petulant boxing authority. Therefore, Mike Tyson had to take the real title from Michael Spinks in the ring before he could follow in the footsteps of the great John L. Sullivan. Even though Larry Holmes appeared to be the next man who would climb into the ring with the heavyweight champion, the countdown had already begun on an eventual Tyson-Spinks confrontation. The media propaganda increased daily as big city publications heralded the credentials of the two men. The champion, Mike Tyson, standing astride the boxing world with a record of 32-0, and the challenger, the undefeated former light heavyweight and IBF heavyweight champion of the world, Michael Spinks, sporting an equally impressive 31-0 mark. The tall, lanky Spinks was certainly a deserving challenger, equally effective attacking or counterpunching. His awkward style confused his opponents and created openings for his two-handed combinations. Ring Magazine championed boxing tradition by recognising Michael Spinks as the true heavyweight champion by reason of the revered line of succession from John L. Sullivan to Larry Holmes. Assuming that the Tyson camp kept its pledge to fight in Japan in March, it would be possible for a Tyson-Spinks match to take place later in 1988, possibly as early as June. But first things first, before the heavyweight king could even begin to think about tangling with Michael Spinks, he first had to get by Larry Holmes and then possibly Tony TNT Tubbs in Tokyo. The Holmes fight was scheduled for the Atlantic City Convention Center on January the 22nd, 1988, only 3 months after the Biggs demolition. Before returning to his training regime, Mike had a personal commitment to keep, helping his old friend, Father George Clement of Holy Angels Church in Chicago. Father Clement, a maverick inner-city priest, had for years kept the Catholic Church of Chicago diocese in an uproar with his unorthodox behaviour. The good father worked with the poor and neglected people of the Windy City, helping them become useful citizens. Although some of Father Clement's methods were unconventional, he strove to educate the citizens in their voter registration rights. For instance, they were results-orientated. Over the years, the black priest became such a champion of people's rights that a TV movie starring Lou Gossett Jr. was made about him. Father Clements had the painful experience of watching his beloved church burn to the ground on June 9, 1986. Shortly thereafter, friends of the good father began to raise the necessary funds to rebuild the structure. As part of that drive, a professional boxing program was held at the DePaul University Alumni Hall on the evening of November 13, 1987. Heading the impressive card was a 7-round heavyweight exhibition match between champion Mike Tyson and his old adversary, James Quick Tillis. By all accounts, the match was a competitive one. Even though the champ wore headgear for this one, the encounter was described as a typical Tyson war. There were no official scorecards kept, but Tillis gave a good account of himself, even carrying the fight to the champion in the final 2 rounds. Thanks to the efforts of people like Tyson and Tillis, the event drew 5,000 fans to the Alumni Hall and added over $50,000 to the church's fund. 2 weeks later, the promotion for the Tyson-Holmes match began in earnest. A press conference was held in the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Hotel in New York City to kick off the event, labelled Heavyweight History by the pugilistic huckster Don King. Mike was first on the scene and politely posed for photographs with Megan Coutinere, the March of Dimes poster child. Megan's mother said later that Mike came right over and hugged her. She told me afterwards that she liked him. Mike liked Megan also, but he didn't like Larry Holmes. He thought Holmes had a bad attitude and was rude and petty. Holmes's behaviour on this day only served to reinforce that opinion. The Eastern assassin kept everyone waiting for over an hour. When he finally did enter the ballroom, an angry Mike refused to shake his hand. Once at the podium, Mike was asked why he hadn't welcomed Holmes to the affair. His reply was curt and to the point: "Because I didn't want to. I don't like Larry Holmes." That was all Don King and the media representatives needed. The reports of bad blood between the two combatants were like music to the ears of the promoter and the men of the press. Stories of the hate war were fed to the fans on a daily basis. For 8 weeks, the press corps kept up the barrage, reporting on the hostility that existed between the two boxers and their camps. In mid-December, the Tyson team moved its base of operations from Catskill to Atlantic City and set up operations in the Beach Club condominium on the boardwalk. Mike brought about a dozen old photographs of former boxing greats with him, and he spent the better part of the first afternoon taping them to the walls of the apartment. The action photos of great fighters like Jack Johnson, Henry Armstrong, and Battling Nelson would constantly remind the young champ of the dedication and discipline required to be the best. They would be his motivation, his driving force for the next 6 weeks. Once the young slugger geared himself to the training regime, he blocked out all outside distractions, maintaining perfect tunnel vision on the job at hand. Kevin Rooney said, "New Year's Eve is on Thursday night. We have a workday on Friday. With sparring, it'll be a quiet New Year's Eve this time. We'll do our celebrating after the fight." Rooney also said, "We're going to have Mike sparring as much as we can. Cuss always said that the best way to prepare for a fight is to spar as much as possible. We teach our fighters to avoid punches. As long as our fighters don't get hit, sparring can only help. Plus, Mike loves to fight. Some of these guys enter the ring only once a year. There's no way you can reach your peak doing that." Including sparring sessions, Mike entered the ring more than 150 times a year. Training camp life can be dreadfully tedious, particularly in a Spartan-like atmosphere. Mike's day began at 4 a.m, long before the sun made its appearance over the Atlantic horizon. Within 20 minutes, the kid from Catskill was doing his 3-mile run along the boardwalk and white sandy beach of the seaside resort. Some days he relaxed briefly by feeding the seagulls from 2 loaves of bread he brought with him. After a light breakfast, the champ and his roommates, Rooney and Lott, killed the morning flipping through newspapers and magazines. At noon, the three men motored to the Pleasantville Recreation Centre for the daily 2-hour workout. They were joined there by Matt Baranski and sparring partners James Quick Tillis, Oliver McCall and James Broad. By mid-afternoon, the 21-year-old was back in his condo, pacing the floor like a prison inmate. Even the meals were eaten in to protect the heavyweight king from his adoring but disruptive fans. In the evening, the group either rented videos or analysed videotapes of the day's training camp activities. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise, goes the old saying. For Mike, that meant hitting the sheets no later than 9 o'clock. Soon, it would be 4 a.m. again, and the cycle would start again. On fight night, both boxers were in a determined mood and ready to mix it up. The 21-year-old champion tipped the scales at a svelte 215 3/4 pounds, his lowest weight in many months. The ageing former heavyweight king, Holmes, now 38, was also well prepared, carrying a tight 225 3/4 pounds on his 6'3" frame. The big question in the Holmes camp was how many rounds his old legs would carry him. At his age, it would be a question of stamina. Unfortunately for the Eastern assassin, he made a strategic blunder just before the fight. Like Joe Frazier and Lou Duva before him, Larry Holmes decided to play a mind game with Mike. As it always had in the past, it backfired. The former champ refused to make his entrance into the cavernous arena at the specified time, choosing to keep the champion waiting an extra 15 minutes. That final rudeness on Holmes' part threw the champion into a rage. An angry Mike threw a savage left hook at the locker room wall, as reported by most news outlets. The flimsy wallboard shattered before his explosive fist, sending plaster dust in all directions. A gaping hole suddenly appeared through the haze, exposing the outside world. As the team of Kevin Rooney, Steve Lott and Matt Baranski stood in shocked silence, cars and pedestrians could be seen through the hole, moving briskly along Pacific Avenue. A stunned Mike just hung his head in embarrassment, while a handler whispered, "My God, he broke the wall." Larry Holmes' parade to the ring was quiet but nostalgic as the PA system blared his familiar pre-fight tune, "Ain't No Stopping Us Now." As soon as Holmes stepped through the ropes, the Tyson team entered the Great Hall, anxious to get on with the fight. The stare down during the referee's instructions was a draw, as both Holmes and Tyson wore their meanest faces. Tyson was an angry young man. He disliked Holmes as a person, and he resented being kept waiting in his dressing room. Now he would get even. He would make Holmes pay for his behaviour. As a side note to this fight, if any of you have gone back and watched the Tyson-Larry Holmes fight, there's a moment that gets reported on social media every few months about a certain piece of history with this fight. It was the fact that Muhammad Ali was in the ring, introduced as the legend that he was, and he goes over to Mike Tyson's ear and he whispers something into Mike Tyson's ear. Now, unbeknownst to us at the time, we didn't know what he said. We just knew that Muhammad Ali had maybe given him words of encouragement for Mike Tyson. But as the story goes, reportedly, Muhammad Ali told Mike Tyson to get him for Muhammad Ali. Bearing in mind Mike Tyson was a huge Muhammad Ali fan, he looked up to him as an idol. When Larry Holmes beat an aging and way past his best Muhammad Ali, that was something that really hurt Muhammad Ali, but also Mike Tyson as a fan. So that moment was a shared bond between the pair of the heavyweight legends. Mike Tyson was going to go out there and get revenge from Muhammad Ali. The kid from Catskill was out as fast at the bell, and he pinned the 38-year-old Holmes on the ropes, unleashing a flurry of punches. The KGO pro tied up the young champion before any damage could be done. Holmes' strategy quickly became evident. He intended to keep the shorter man at a distance by utilising his reach advantage, constantly keeping his left in Mike's face. Most of the time, he simply used a straight arm to fend off the champion, rather than employ his famous snapping jab. Holmes kept out of harm's way by circling to the right. This manoeuvre prevented Mike from throwing a right hand over the Holmes left, which he always carried waist high, and which left him vulnerable to a right hand lead. That flaw in Holmes' style resulted in 3 knockdowns during his reign, by such sluggers as Ronaldo Snipes and Ernie Shavers. The champion ran across the ring and started dancing as he pursued the former champion in round 2. Holmes was still not ready to mix it up with the young New Yorker, choosing instead to conserve his energy. His only sign of aggression was trying to nail Mike with a right hand when the champion moved in, a strategy that had been attempted by other Tyson opponents. Thomas, Tucker and Biggs had all tried to time their right hands against the charging Mike. All failed to land a solid punch against the bobbing and weaving champion. As usual, Mike proved to be elusive, constantly slipping Holmes' jabs. He picked up the pace in round 2, scoring with several punishing left hooks to the head and as well as some crunching body shots. Holmes' infrequent attempts at retaliation were ineffective as the champion deftly avoided the blows. Round 3 was another slow round, with Mike chasing his man and Holmes circling and keeping a stiff left jab in the champion's face. Mike caught the Eastern assassin with a big right hand at the bell and followed up with a left hook before referee Cortez could jump in and separate the fighters. Between rounds, Larry Holmes realised he didn't have the stamina to maintain good lateral movement for a full 12 rounds. His legs were already giving out on him. The moment of truth had arrived for the cagey veteran, and he decided to make his stand now. Round 4 would be the last round, one way or the other. To everyone's surprise, Holmes came out on his toes at the bell and danced like a 20-year-old kid. The crowd screamed in anticipation. The old Holmes jab was evident once more, snapping Tyson's head back when the champ tried to move inside. This looked like the Larry Holmes who ruled the heavyweight division for 7 years, the man who destroyed all challengers to his title, including Muhammad Ali himself. Holmes was determined to carry the fight to this young champion in the round. His strength was gradually slipping away, and it was obvious to him that he could not last much longer. If he were to win, it would have to be by an early KO. At the 1 minute mark, the kid from Catskill caught Holmes standing straight up, resting against the ropes, his left hand low. The alert champion immediately sent the big man reeling backwards with a solid left hook. Seconds later, Mike parried with a soft left and then came across with a lightning-like right hook that broke through Holmes' guard and smashed against his left temple, just above and behind the eye. Holmes wobbled momentarily and then toppled backward like a giant redwood, his equilibrium gone. It was reminiscent of the blow that spelled lights out for Trevor Burbeck. The Galleon challenger rose quickly, but it was obvious he was in serious trouble. He stood in the corner, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs, as referee Joe Cortez told the mandatory 8 count. Holmes would note later that the punch destroyed his balance, and he was never able to fully recover. With his legs gone, the former champion could not avoid the determined young slugger. His only hope was to stand and still try and tie up his man. But Mike would not be denied. He was in quickly, throwing punches in bunches. Even though none of them landed cleanly, a glancing right to Holmes' head sent the unsteady challenger to the canvas a second time. As he tried to rise on shaky pins, he fell backward into the ropes. A concerned Joe Cortez wiped off the old champion's gloves and took a good look at his eyes. He made the fight go on, allowing an embattled Holmes to leave the ring on his shield. There was still 1 minute to go in the round, and the fired-up champion pursued his man around the ring. For 35 precious seconds, the proud Holmes absorbed a fusillade of punches, but he would not quit. Just when it seemed he might survive the onslaught, Mike backed him against the ropes and stunned him with a paralysing right to the side of the head. Holmes' instincts told him to cover up, but he was no match for the strong young champion. Mike smashed a left hook to Holmes' unprotected jaw, then dug a hard right to the challenger's ribcage. The champion immediately stepped to the side, as he had done 1,000 times in the gym under the watchful eye of Custy Amato. He unleashed a powerful right hook, thrown with all the bad intentions he could generate. The punch barely grazed the side of Holmes' head, but a swift follow-up right hand caught the old pro on the point of the chin, snapping his head violently to the right and dropping him straight down as if his legs had been cut out from under him. There was no count. Referee Joe Cortez, realising that the former champion was unconscious, signalled an end to the carnage. It was a good outing for Mike. He overcame frustration, learned patience, and followed his trainer's between rounds instructions. He had fought a wily old ex-champion who knew all the tricks. He learned from the older man. he benefited from the lesson and he came away victorious. At the post-fight press conference, the undefeated champion was a matter of fact about the significance of the fight. He said, "I made it clear to Larry Holmes that his career is unquestionably over. Larry was a great champion during his time, but this isn't his time anymore. He had his reign, and his reign is over. This is my era now." Now, while Bill Caton and Jim Jacobs struggled to put together a Tyson-Spinks match for early summer, a warm-up fight was scheduled for Tokyo, Japan on the evening of March 21st. The fight was part of a week-long celebration to dedicate the capital city's new domed arena. Korakuen Stadium, labelled the Big Egg by the natives because of its enormous white oval roof, could accommodate 65,000 spectators. The Japanese promoter, Akiko Honda, specifically chose Tony Tubbs to be Mike's next opponent because of his durability as well as his ring prowess. He had never been knocked out in 8 years as a pro and had compiled a solid 24-1 record along the way. The former WBA champion had fought 10 rounds on more than 7 different occasions, his only loss coming on a close 15-round decision to terrible Tim Witherspoon. Honda, ever mindful of the 1973 title fight between George Foreman and Jose King Roman, an embarrassing 2-minute fiasco, and realising Mike's proclivity toward early knockouts, wanted to assure himself of the longest and most competitive fight possible, hence Tony TNT Tubbs. Jacobs and Caton started negotiations with Butch Lewis for a Tyson-Spinks matchup while Iron Mike was preparing for his January title defence against Holmes. The big stumbling block in the deal was money, as usual. On Saturday, the 23rd of January, Team Tyson offered Lewis $10.8 million compared with $16.2 million for Mike. Lewis threw his nose up at that offer, blatantly holding out for the $15 million. Bill Caton was livid. "You mean if you don't get $15 million, there's no fight?" "That's it," said Lewis as he headed for the door. Caton's eyes followed him closely. "If you walk out, don't come back," he said. Butch Lewis slammed the door in his face. Getting the two premier heavyweights together in the same ring appeared to be about as easy as getting President Reagan and Ayatollah Khomeini to dine together in Jerusalem. The personalities of the principals, particularly Jacobs and Lewis, were incompatible, and their participation in the negotiations exacerbated an already delicate situation. Enter one, Shelley Finkel. The smooth working promoter was rushed into the negotiations by Bill Caton to formulate a package acceptable to both parties. Working like a fine diamond cutter, Finkel did just that. Stroking everyone's ego, the redoute businessman actually had Lewis and Jacobs smiling and shaking hands in a matter of days. The finished arrangement had Mike guaranteed a minimum of $17 million and Spinks $13.5 million. Both fighters could add to their take depending on the closed-circuit television revenues. Donald Trump, with some fancy footwork of his own, obtained the rights to the fight without having to engage in a bidding war with Las Vegas. Trump had been massaging the Tyson group for many months, going all the way back to the Jose Ribalta fight in September of '86. The New York millionaire paid an exorbitant price to snare the Ribalta match, but he established a good rapport with Jacobs and Caton along the way. The two groups worked well together, and most importantly, they trusted each other. When Trump purchased the rights to the Holmes fight, he also received the right of first refusal to any future Michael Spinks match. Don King subsequently offered the Spinks fight to Donald Trump for the astronomical price tag of $11 million. If Trump refused the offer, King could peddle it on the open market for the same amount. Donald Trump quickly accepted the deal. The long-awaited heavyweight battle would take place in Atlantic City Convention Center, adjacent to the Trump Hotel and Casino, on June the 27th. A vacationing Mike wasn't interested in the business aspects of the fight. He just wanted to get Michael Spinks in the ring. The histrionics of Lewis and Spinks disgusted the young champion to the point where he once remarked, "Sometimes I just want to take Spinks and slap him alongside the head." Another time he suggested, "We'll both go down into a cellar, and the one that comes out is the champion." Naturally, Spinks declined the offer. Before the final chapter of the Tyson-Spinks saga could unfold, the champion first had to fulfill the commitment with Tony Tubbs in Tokyo. A bout that was considered to be nothing more than a showcase event to present Mike Tyson to his millions of admiring fans in the land of the rising sun. 1 week before Mike's scheduled departure for Japan, the young champion's world was turned upside down, and things would never again be the same. On Sunday morning, February the 7th, Mike Tyson and girlfriend Robin Givens planed to Chicago to attend the annual NBA All-Star Game. They watched in admiration as the top players in the game put on an incredible ball handling and scoring exhibition, led by Givens' old boyfriend, Michael Jordan. Air Jordan, as he was reverently referred to by the fans, waltzed off with the Most Valuable Player award after netting a game-high 40 points. Still, the prolific East All-Stars hung on to win the game by 138 to 133 margin. As the crowd filed out of the huge arena, Mike Tyson suddenly grabbed Givens by the arm and started dragging her towards the exit. "Let's get married," he whispered nervously. Caught up in the excitement of the moment, Givens nodded assent, and the two youngsters raced for a cab. They sought out Mike's old friend, Father George Clements, who agreed to marry them in the chapel of the Holy Angels Rectory. Before half a dozen witnesses gathered together hurriedly, the 21-year-old Tyson and the strikingly beautiful 23-year-old Givens were united in holy matrimony. Immediately after the final blessing, the newlyweds sped to O'Hare Airport to catch the return flight to the Big Apple. On the way, Mike made a hurried telephone call to Camille with the good news, and she in turn informed his manager. Jim Jacobs was caught completely off guard. "Bill and I are surprised by the move. It's sort of a shock." As an afterthought, Jacobs confirmed Mike's schedule for the Tubbs fight. Mike's training will go on schedule. He will leave the US on February the 16th. I'm not sure if Robin is going, but if she does, it won't be a problem. The Tysons were married a second time in New York 2 days later, this time in a civil ceremony performed by Judge Charles E. Ramos in the city clerk's office. In spite of the recent change in the champ's marital status, the Tyson entourage departed Kennedy Airport as planned and began their grand adventure to the Far East. On March the 21st, when the bell will ring for round one, Mike will be ready, and the training camp was not as Spartan as in previous Tyson camps. This time, the kid from Catskill found time to tour Tokyo with his new bride and 5 security guards, all karate experts. They visited the Uno Zoo several times, strolled through many of the colourful gardens that decorate the capital city, and pay homage to the famous old Tokyo boxing arena, Korakuen Hall. Along the way, the Tysons visited the Children's Hospital and made an appearance at the Sumo Wrestlers Gym, where photographers had a field day, snapping pictures of the heavyweight champion facing off in the ring against a 400-pound Hawaiian sumo wrestler, Sally Kuninsky. Bill Caton arrived in Tokyo just 8 days before the fight, but he came alone. His partner, Jim Jacobs, for the first time in his life, wasn't able to attend one of Mike's professional fights. Jim remained in New York, reportedly recovering from a minor illness. Korakuen Stadium was buzzing with anticipation as the fight drew near. The champion appeared ready to go, weighing in at a trim 216 pounds. The challenger, for all his good intentions, came in carrying a blubbery 238 pounds on his 6'3" frame. Although Tubbs, a former WBA champion, had impressive ring credentials, his poor physical condition prevented this fight from being a major pugilistic event. A great, noisy welcome ushered the kid from Brownsville into the huge arena. Clad in his usual somber black attire, the champion looked calm and peaceful as he walked down the aisle. But by the time he reached the ring, his expression had darkened, and he was once again a man whose mission was to search and destroy. The bald spot that had once decorated the front of Tyson's scalp was no longer visible. Now, he knew who he was. He was the champion, and he was comfortable in his new position. The nervous tension that accompanied Tyson's rapid rise to the top of the professional ranks and had caused a temporary baldness was a thing of the past. It had been replaced by confidence and self-assurance. So, we go into the fight, and the first 30 seconds of round one was a feeling out process, with each fighter sizing up the other. Tubbs, showing a stiff left jab and good lateral movement, he'd come to fight, not to run. It was obvious that Tubbs was not intimidated by the champion's press clippings. He treated Mike just like any other opponent. Both fighters landed some good exchanges as the action was brisk in an even round. Midway through round 2, the baddest man on the planet caught Tubbs with the ode 8-2, the uppercut jolting the challenger, who fought back with a stiff uppercut of his own. The two fighters mauled each other at close quarters. Then Mike unloaded a short left hook to the side of the head that rocked Tubbs. He immediately drove the Ohio fighter to the ropes and worked the body with a series of left-right combinations. A hard left to the top of Tubbs' head stunned the big man. In the centre of the ring once more, Tubbs fired a 3-punch combination but failed to slow down the champion. Once again, Mike scored with a vicious 8-2 combination, causing Tubbs to hold on. As soon as the action resumed, Mike exploded a short chopping left hook to the temple. Tubbs' hands went up to his head immediately, and he turned his back to his tormentor, blood gushing from a nasty cut over his right eye. He stumbled towards a neutral corner on wobbly legs, and with Mike in hot pursuit, made a grab for the ring rope, missed, and collapsed in a heap on his back. Trainer Odell Hadley was in the ring in a flash, stopping the contest without a count at 2 minutes and 54 seconds of the round. Commentator Jim Lampley informed the television audience that the fight ended with stunning swiftness. Mike had successfully defended his title for the 6th time, ending it with another paralysing punch to the temple, much like the blows that destroyed the equilibrium of both Trevor Burbeck and Larry Holmes. The champion himself was surprised at the way the fight ended. He said, "He's very crafty. When I hit him, I thought he was like one of those cute guys who appear shaken but don't fall." He also took time out to make a promise to the people's champion, Michael Spinks. Michael Spinks knows what he's got coming. I'm coming after him. 2 days after the Tony Tubbs fight, tragedy struck the Tyson household. Manager Jim Jacobs succumbed to pneumonia in New York's Mount Sinai Hospital at the age of 57. Jacobs had been suffering from chronic lymphatic leukemia for 9 years, a fact known only to his wife Lorraine, his partner Bill Caton, Camille Lawald, and Kevin Rooney. The ugly truth had been kept from Mike in order to let him concentrate on his career without the traumatic distractions of the impending death of a loved one. The bereaved champion went into seclusion for several days, trying to deal with and accept the loss of his closest friend and advisor. Bill Caton was the spokesman. He's not up to making any statements. He's totally distraught. Assistant manager Steve Lott eulogised his employer as an honest and decent human being. He said, after Cuss died, the only person with Cuss's information was Jim. But what Cuss had was character, and Jimmy had that same unwavering character. Whatever was proper, no matter what other people thought about it, was the right thing to do. And he would never veer from that. With the death of Jim Jacobs, the umbilical cord connecting Cus D'Amato to Mike Tyson was finally severed. Jim Jacobs had been an extension of the fabled trainer. Now the young champion was on his own for the first time. Just when the man-child had reached the top of his profession, just when he had scaled the summit of Mount Olympus, the gods suddenly deserted him. He had proven himself in a boxing ring, and he was the champion of the world. Now the gods seemed determined to test his mettle as a man. It would turn out to be a long and torturous journey. After Jacobs' funeral, Mike tried to pick up the pieces, but family problems only added to his despair. His wife, Robin Givens, who had promised to bring peace of his mind to his life, brought turmoil instead. With her mother, Ruth Roper, and the professional agitator Don King, Givens lashed out at manager Bill Caton, accusing him of mishandling Mike's financial affairs. The two women demanded that Caton provide them with a complete accounting of Mike's finances. Soon after, they sought to cancel Mike's managerial contract with the elderly advisor. As the weeks passed, the accusations from the Roper-King group increased, until everyone in the Tyson-Roper family was embroiled in the dispute. The newspapers, TV networks, and pulp magazines had a field day reporting on all aspects of Mike's private lives. The headlines that leaked from the newsstands were generally uncomplimentary to the motives of Robin and her mother. The two women were vilified as gold diggers and worse. At one point, 1 week before the Spinks fight, photographs of Mike and Robin appeared in a dozen or more magazines, including such popular non-sports magazines as Time, Life, and People Weekly. In the Bible, Samson was bewitched by a single woman, Delilah. Mike Tyson had inherited 3 Delilahs. Their names were Ruth, Robin, and Stephanie. The champ took the adverse publicity extremely hard, becoming very defensive and protective of his family. He cut short several interviews when the questioning infringed on his private life. Boxing experts feared the out-of-the-ring distractions might affect the champion's performance against Michael Spinks. The odds on the fight reflected this uncertainty, falling from 7-1 to 32.5-1 by the fight. In spite of the notoriety surrounding his new family and his managerial problems, the kid from Catskill still had to prepare himself to meet the people's champion Michael Spinks in the richest match in boxing history, an estimated $80 million. The super fight was labelled once and for all by promoters Don King and Donald Trump, and the ticket prices reflected the popularity of the confrontation. Ringside seats went for the staggering sum of $1,500, while the cheap seats sold for a lofty $100. Needless to say, the cheap seats were sold out within an hour of being put on sale. Many of the $1,500 seats were purchased by the gambling casinos, who distributed them to their favoured high rollers to entice them back to the gaming tables. Other ringside seats were handed out to popular celebrities in order to create a Hollywood-style atmosphere around the gala event. The die-hard boxing fan was forced to pay at least $300 to witness the extravaganza in person. Preparations for the fight went surprisingly smoothly, considering Mike's personal situation. His legal and managerial problems kept the champ in California longer than expected, and he arrived in Catskill 2 weeks late. When he finally did report to the Custy Amato gym, he was bloated at 242 pounds. Kevin Rooney had only 6 weeks to melt away the fat and get the heavyweight king razor sharp for the toughest fight of his life, a seemingly impossible task. Insiders predicted that Mike would enter the ring something over 222 pounds, the heaviest of his career, but Mike and Kevin had other ideas. The two D'Amato protégés filled the experts. Mike showed the public what it means to be a champion. Once inside the confines of the gym, Iron Mike was back in his own element, where he was king, blocking out all his outside problems. The Brooklyn native drove himself as never before, putting everything he had into his gym programs and his sparring sessions. He gave himself body and soul to his tyrannical trainer, Kevin Rooney, and vowed to adhere to Rooney's stringent conditioning program. Nothing was left to chance. Mike did his usual 3 rounds on the slip bag daily as Rooney monitored the action. He said, "The purpose of the slip bag is to get a fighter moving his head, to get him in the habit of moving his head correctly. You have to try and be elusive. As long as a fighter's trying to be elusive, he's going to be all right. That's what I emphasise. That's what we've got over everybody else." At the pre-fight press conference, Bill Caton dedicated the fight to his deceased partner, Jim Jacobs. He said, "This is really Jimmy's fight. He often talked to me about tracing champions and how titles should be won and lost in the ring. Tyson holds all 3 belts, but boxing historians claim Spinks is the real champion because he took the title from Larry Holmes, who was in a direct line of succession from John L. Sullivan." The people's champion, Michael Spinks, appeared apprehensive about the confrontation. Obviously nervous, the St. Louis fighter tried to mask his feelings by putting on an act, grabbing the microphone and screaming in fear, "I don't want to go! I don't want to go!" On the serious side, Spinks admitted, "It'll be a nervous fight for me, but this is one that must happen. I think the public wants it." The most confident person in the room was the undisputed heavyweight champion, who promised, "I don't know how to lose, and I can assure you this fight will not go the distance. There's nobody on this planet who can beat me." 2 days before the fight, the combatants journeyed to the Trump Plaza for the official weigh-in. Mike astounded everyone by coming in at 218 pounds, only 6 pounds more than the challenger. Speaking with perfect tunnel vision, Mike exuded supreme confidence about the upcoming encounter. He said, "My objective is to knock him out and to win in spectacular fashion. People that believe it's going to be the fight of the century are going to be disappointed. It won't go the distance." The fight itself almost took a backseat to the glitzy sideshow that had been arranged by King and Trump. The evening was a major media event, an extravaganza unequalled in the history of Atlantic City. In addition to the magazine coverage and daily newspaper articles, the three principal television networks carried live reports from the fight capital on their morning shows. Today on NBC, CBS Morning News and ABC's Good Morning America. 1,300 press credentials were issued to reporters from over 40 countries, and hundreds more were denied. Gambling casinos anticipated record takes as the three-day weekend was expected to gross $80 million at the gaming tables. The celebrity list grew daily, with more than 40 superstars from the worlds of business, politics, sports and entertainment planning to attend the Hollywood-like affair. Big names included Jack Nicholson, Jesse Jackson, Frank Sinatra, Malcolm Forbes, Walter Payton and Bjorn Borg. Mike Tyson appeared more relaxed as the big hour neared. As he had said more than once, fighting's the easy part. I enjoy that. By 7:30 on fight night, the convention centre resembled an Academy Award celebration. Crowds of excited people watchers gathered outside the great arena to catch a glimpse of their idols. Celebrities arrived in a steady stream of stretch limousines. The men, in their usual formal tuxedos, looked like so many penguins, but the women alighted from their carriages in a variety of glamorous designer creations that brought whistles and cheers from the male spectators, and oohs and ahs from the envious ladies present. Spotlights raked the boardwalk, and flashbulbs popped endlessly as the parade of celebrities made their way into the Great Hall. The boardwalk buzzed with activity as a circus atmosphere pervaded the seaside resort. Souvenirs of the fight sold like hotcakes. Gold-laden professional athletes strutted their affluence like brilliantly coloured peacocks, and every third-class pickpocket east of the Mississippi roamed the promenade with visions of a record nightly take dancing in their heads. The champion nervously paced his dressing room in anticipation of the long-awaited battle. As dangerous as Mike was, Butch Lewis played into his hands even more by throwing a temper tantrum in Spinks' dressing room. First, he complained that his representative was not present to witness the taping of Mike's hands. Then he announced that Spinks would not enter the convention centre first, but would wait for Mike to go. The delay dragged on for almost 30 minutes, while Mike fumed. Even the casual fan could have told Butch Lewis that it was suicide to antagonise Mike prior to a fight. Just ask Mitch Green, Marvis Fraser, Lou Duva or Tyrell Biggs about that. Further, history showed that when Mike Tyson was mad at the fighter's manager, he took the fighter out quick. When Smoking Joe Frazier had made derogatory remarks about his boxing ability, the champ disposed of son Marvis in just 30 seconds. On the other hand, when the champion was angry at the fighter himself, he extended the fight in order to punish his opponent before putting him away. He pummeled Tyrell Biggs for 7 rounds before knocking out the former Olympic champion. He disliked Mitch Green even more, so he carried the tough heavyweight for 10 agonising rounds, determined not to inflict the final coup de grace on the Bronx braggart. As Tyson explained, if Green wants out, he'll have to quit. I'm not going to go for a knockout. Based on these facts, and Butch Lewis's poorly timed theatrics, Michael Spinks might have expected a short night in the trenches. Michael Buffer brought the convention centre crowd to a fever pitch with his long-awaited announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble! As referee Frank Cappuccino brought the two fighters together, the champion oozed confidence and determination, while the challenger appeared apprehensive, almost resigned to his fate. Mike danced out quickly when the bell sounded, throwing a flurry of lefts and rights to the body and head of Spinks, who moved along the ropes and escaped. Spinks tried to catch the aggressive champion with a sneaky right hand as the champion moved in, but the punch fell short of its mark. Another right failed to connect as the two fighters mixed it up. Spinks seemed demoralised as Mike chased him around the ring. The young champion was more elusive than Spinks thought he would be. Mike was aggressive and active, but he always fought under control. He practiced what Cus D'Amato preached. It's always better when you can hit him and he can't hit you. 2 hard rights to the head preceded a Tyson barrage that drove a confused Spinks along the ropes. A bone-jarring uppercut found Spinks' jaw stunning the St. Louis fighter, who went into a crouch and covered up, trying to forestall the inevitable. A crunching right hand just below the heart dropped Spinks to one knee at 1 minute and 2 seconds. It took Mike just 3 seconds to finish the job once the fight resumed. As the combatants approached each other, Spinks let fly a right hand, then ducked into Mike just as the champion threw a vicious right uppercut. The punch caught Spinks on the right side of his head, knocking him straight back to the canvas. His head bounced off the floor with a sickening thud, his legs twitching convulsively in an eerie dance of distress. Cappuccino leaned over the fallen fighter and began the count. The dazed challenger attempted to rise, but as he got to his hands and knees, he slumped forward across the bottom strand of rope. It was officially a 1-minute, 30-second knockout, the fourth shortest in heavyweight history. Mike was across the ring quickly to console his defeated opponent. With the electrifying knockout of Michael Spinks, young Mike had completed a dizzying attack on the heavyweight division. 8 title fights in just 19 months, including 7 against heavyweight champions or former champions. He found the heavyweight division in chaos. He left it in a shambles. At the tender age of 22, he was proclaimed the People's Champion. After the fight, Mike made his usual stop at Cuss's grave. After every defence of his title, Mike went up there with a big bottle of champagne and celebrated with Cuss. Cuss loved champagne. Kevin Rooney always loved to get after Mike about it. Stop putting that damn bottle on Cuss's gravesite, he'd tell Mike every time he saw a Dom Perignon bottle by the grave. He knew Mike had been there. Things got crazier after the Spinks fight. Bill Caton was indignant because he got sued, but nobody in the press thought it was wrong for Jim and Bill to hand Mike over like he was a piece of property. If anyone was betrayed, it was Mike. With Jim gone, there was no way that Mike would have wanted Caton to be his manager, and if Cuss had still been around, Caton would have been long gone. Cuss never liked Caton because he had done some work with the IBC, Cuss's mortal enemies. Everyone was now pressuring Mike to get back in the ring, but he was in no hurry. Mike was supposed to fight Frank Bruno in London, but at the press conference to announce the settlement with Caton, he stunned everyone. I think I'm going to pass on the Bruno fight and take 6 to 8 weeks off to relax. I just don't feel like fighting now. Mike was spending more and more time with Don King by that point. He had gone to Cleveland in May and stayed at his house for a few days. Don had gotten Mike to sign a promotional agreement with him, but they kept it hushed up until after the Spinks fight. Don had played everybody like a fiddle. Sometime that year, Don had taken Mike to see Michael Jackson perform. Don had done promotions for Michael and his father, so he took Mike backstage after the show. He had met Joe Jackson at some of his fights because he was a player. So they were backstage, and Michael was by himself standing in the corner, waiting for his car to come. Nobody could get near him, but he saw that Tyson was surrounded by people wanting his autograph. Tyson wanted to shake Michael's hand before he got in that car, so he walked over to him. "How you doing, Mr. Jackson? It's a pleasure to meet you," Tyson said. He paused for a second and looked over at Mike. "I know you from somewhere, don't I?" said Michael. He shat on Tyson that night. Michael Jackson knew who Tyson was, but he couldn't be mad. He thought he was beautiful. He couldn't wait to try that line on someone else. When Don King came to New York on August 16th, he dropped the bomb that Mike had signed an exclusive promotional contract with him. Bill Caton went ballistic and threatened to sue. The women were pretty much out of the picture by now. They had lost their bid to take over Mike's business, so they were continuing their plan B, paint him out as some kind of monster and get a great divorce settlement. Throughout the summer, Robin kept giving interviews claiming that Mike was violent with her, but when the reporters would ask for documentation, they couldn't back up her bullshit claims. The women's next plan was to get him committed to a psychiatric ward, which would allow them to take control of Mike's finances. Ruth kept trying to get Mike to see this shrink she knew. Mike refused to see him, so they talked to him on the phone, and he diagnosed Mike with manic depression. On September 4th, Mike was in Catskill with Camille. He hadn't been seeing much of Robin and Ruth, but he had been taking some pills for his supposed manic depression from time to time. Camille was against Mike taking them. She thought they made him dopey and withdrawn. Mike kinda liked that dopey feeling, but she was urging him to get a second opinion. While he was there, Robin called him all the time. "Why are you up there? Why aren't you with us?" "Fuck you. I don't want to talk to you anymore," he said. "I want to divorce you. I want to kill myself," he answered one day, and then hung up. Mike was really mad, and he got into his car to go to town to get some stuff. It had been raining out and the dirt driveway was all muddy. To get to the main road, you had to drive up the driveway about 50 feet at a 10-degree angle. Mike started his big BMW and gave it gas, but the wheels were spinning in the mud, so he gave it more gas and it skidded out and headed for a big tree. Mike had intentionally planned to hit the tree to get attention, but he never tried to kill himself. Mike knew the car would protect him, but his head hit the steering wheel, and the next thing you knew, Camille was standing over him, slapping his face and attempting to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He staged a suicide attempt backfired on him. He didn't want to die or even injure himself. Mike just wanted attention. He still loved Robin, and he wanted to make her feel bad for all the pain she caused him. Even then, Mike had an addict's mentality. He takes the poison and then waits for his enemy to die. Because Mike had lost consciousness for a while, Camille called an ambulance and they took him to the local Catskill hospital. Somebody must have called Robin because while he was settling into the hospital room, eating some takeout Chinese food that Mike had Jay bring him, Robin rushed in, followed by camera crews and another ambulance. She was going to save the day, in time for the 5 o'clock news. "See what the fuck you made me do?" Mike snarled at her. The doctors told him he had a chest concussion and blunt head trauma, so Mike decided to get transferred to New York Presbyterian Hospital in the city. Robin was right next to his gurney, dramatically trying to move the photographers away, but staying right in the centre of their frames. When they got to the city, Robin and her mother gave a hospital an approved list of visitors. On the list was Donald and Ivana Trump, Howard Rubenstein, the PR man, and their attorneys. They weren't his friends, but his friends weren't coming around when he was with the Terrible Two anyway. Mike did have one unwelcome visitor though. His window was open and he heard a commotion down on the sidewalk outside. Mike looked out and he couldn't believe his eyes. It was Mitch Green, surrounded by the media. Mitch had his shirt off and he was shadowboxing and screaming, "Sissy Tyson is a faggot. I'm gonna beat his motherfucking ass." Mike couldn't escape this fool. If there was ever a black guy who resembled the Frankenstein monster, it would be Mitch Green. Mike realised why the PR guy was on his approved guest list when he picked up the next morning's Daily News. There was a big article by some feature writer named McClary, a guy Mike didn't know. Not a boxing man anyway. McClary said that Mike's accident was a serious suicide attempt. "I'm going to get out of here and kill myself. I'm going to go and crash my car," McClary claimed that Mike had told Robin. Then he wrote that a week earlier that Mike had threatened to kill Robin. Unnamed friends of Mike were quoted as saying that he had bought 2 shotguns in Catskill to kill himself with. He had a grieving Gibbon sitting worried by his bedside while Mike said, "I told you I'd do it, and as soon as I get out of here, I'll do it again." McClary wrote that the women were pleading with Mike to go and see a psychiatrist and that the shrink in question wanted to commit him for psychiatric evaluation. It honestly didn't take a genius to see that the 2 women were building a case that Mike was an out-of-control psycho that should be committed and that his wealth should be under their control. McClary went on to say that Mike had been sick all these years and he had been on medication, but Cuss took Mike off it because Cuss just cared about him fighting. McClary also wrote that only Donald Trump, Rubenstein and Parcher, their lawyer, really understood Mike's needs and were more interested in his well-being than in his next fight. Robin's camp must have leaked this to the papers, and Ruth Roper must have dragged out that old bullshit that Mike knew how to hit Robin without leaving marks, because there it was in the article. "I am Mike Tyson, supposed to know how to beat people up without leaving a mark?" Yeah, of course, when his whole career was built on him being a bone breaker. A few days later, Mike flew to Moscow with Robin and her mother and her publicist because her sitcom was filming there. Mike was always fascinated by Russian history, so he decided to take the trip there. Mike used to hear Kuss and Norman Mailer talk about Tolstoy, so he became a great fan of Russian culture and their prize-fighters. Before they left, they had to answer reporters' questions about the ridiculed suicide attempt. Mike said, "I love my wife. I don't beat my wife. I'm never going to leave my wife, and my wife is never going to leave me. Nobody is busting up our marriage," Robin said. "I'm still in this. I love Michael, and will take care of him. Michael loves me too much to kill himself and leave me alone." Yeah, of course she was still in it, so she could get her money. When they got back from Moscow, all these stories of Mike being out of control started getting leaked to the press. Supposedly, Mike was running around the hotel screaming, hanging from a high ledge, threatening to kill himself and hitting Robin. I guess they forgot that we were in Russia, and the Russian cops would have beat Mike's ass if he did anything like that. When the US reporters actually fact-checked these stories, they interviewed one of the producers of her show, who said, Mike was a perfect gentleman in Russia. One of the makeup people on the show told her friend that the stories of Mike beating up Robin were a big joke. She said, I read all the papers where Robin's being quoted as saying how much he hits her and beats up on her. I do the makeup on her. I see her. There were no bruises on this girl. I just don't understand how she's getting away with it. A few days after they got back from Russia, Ruth and Robin finally dragged Mike to see their shrink. After about an hour of him telling Mike how sick he was, Mike started believing him. He had the degrees on the wall. If Mike told him he was a shitty fighter, was he going to dispute Mike? Now, they had Mike thinking that he was a manic depressive. That's what the shrink kept on drumming in. It wasn't unknown that Mike obviously had his issues. We've talked about him through the episodes. But it's been like that all his life. And they convinced him that he was a manic depressive. So they convinced him that he had to take drugs, and then they paraded him in front of the cameras. This is what Mike said. I was born with this disease. I can't help it. Maybe that's why I'm successful at what I do. It's like going through a metamorphosis, changing from very, very depressed to very, very high-strung. And the high-strung period is so overwhelming. You know, I'm like anti-drugs, but it's like being high and not being able to sleep for 3 or 4 days and always being on the run. You're just paranoid. It's abnormal. Robin said, he's been like this for many years, and they've been ignoring it. Michael takes a great deal of protecting. You can't put a band-aid on it. Who cares if he fights again? This guy's got to live the rest of his life. We'll be in treatment together. Now that Mike was a zombie again taking these pills, the ruthless two decided that Camille had to also be out of the equation. Mike had just started paying for Camille's expenses after Jimmy died. Both Ruth and Robin told Camille that if he was going to pay all the house bills, the house should be put in his name. When they told Mike that, he flipped out. Are you fucking crazy, bitch? Mike told Robin. The next day, Robin called Camille again, and she ordered Camille to stay out of Mike's life. He never knew that at the time. The next day, Robin and her mother left for LA. Mike's friend, Mark Breland, the boxer, wanted him to make up with Bill Caton and shake his hand. Shelley Finkel and Caton had brainwashed Mark. They told him Mike was really messed up, and they convinced Mark to come to talk to Mike. They went up there, and Caton was very concerned about the manic depressive label, so he set up an appointment for Mike with Dr. Abraham Halpern, the director of psychiatry at the New York United Hospital Medical Center in Port Chester, one of the top psychiatrists in the world. Halpern saw Mike for an hour. Then he called and spoke to Camille, Steve Lott, and Bill Caton. He was certain that Mike didn't suffer from manic depression. When Halpern called their shrink that they had brought in to find out why he diagnosed Mike as a manic depressive, he started backpedaling. He said Mike wasn't a fully fledged manic depressive, he merely had a mood disorder, something that the shrink called boxer syndrome. Mike was relieved that a much more prominent psychiatrist had cleared him of manic depression, but Mike wondered why Bill made such a big deal about Mike seeing Mark. He really had nothing to say. Mike went there under the pretense that something big was going to happen, and then he got there, and he was really ambiguous on what he was trying to say. Mike's relationship with Bill had run its course. So when all the dust cleared, there was still Don King standing. Mike had no illusions about him. When Robin used to ask Mike about Don, Mike said, look, I know how to control a snake. This guy is a snake, but I know how to control a snake. Don did have his good points. 2 days after the women split for the coast, Don took Mike around to each and every one of his bank and brokerage accounts. Don had them take Robin's name off each account and switch them back to Mike. That was $15 million right there. The people in the banks disliked the women so much that they were thrilled to help them. Mike and Don were up there partying with the bank president and all the bank workers, popping champagne and ordering him pizzas. Fuck them bitches, Mike shouted as they downed the bubbly. When Mike and Robin split up, he went to a wrestling show in Chicago, and when he walked in and sat down, he got a standing ovation from the audience. People were coming up to him, telling him what ugly shit they had done to him on the Barbara Walters show. Mike also got tons of sympathy and love from women. Mike was severely traumatized by that relationship. It was his first relationship, and he wanted to just cancel it out. But love leaves a black mark on your heart. It can really scar you, but you have to take chances to keep growing as an individual. That's what life's all about, and Mike always had the newspaper to vent to. A guy from the Chicago Sun-Times asked Mike about Robin and her mother. Mike said, "They use them, but they don't like or respect black people. The way they talk about black people, you'd think they were living with the Ku Klux Klan. They thought they were royalty. She and her mother wanted so much to be white. It's a shame. And they were trying to take me away from the people I grew up with and throw me into their kind of high-class world." Mike was now making changes in his life on all fronts. Bill Caton was still technically managing him, but he was out of the picture. Maybe things would have been different if Jimmy was still alive. But after he died, nobody could stop Mike from doing what he wanted to do. When you look back on it, Mike doesn't think Jimmy and Bill were evil. He thought they were businessmen, and they were more seasoned than he was. But Mike was in way over his head, and they took advantage of that too. But they were control freaks, and as Mike got older, he wanted his liberation. He wanted to do his own thing. If he failed or succeeded, it didn't matter. Mike just wanted to do it on his own. With Cuss and Jim gone, Mike didn't care about any of those people. So he thought, whoever gives him the highest bid, whatever he wanted, they'll just go with them. It became a game to him. Everybody was thinking about themselves, so Mike might as well think about himself. All his friends from his neighbourhood were dying and dead anyway, so Mike was trying to have some fun. He had no anticipation of having a long life. Mike was too much of an irritant. You can catch him in one of his irritating moods and you might get shot. Mike was now living a fantasy life, going from country to country, sleeping with beautiful strangers. That shit began to take its toll on him. Don gave Mike the freedom to do what he wanted. He was handling the business and making deals behind his back, but Mike wasn't Don's bitch. Don was very smart in instilling in Mike the auspices that it was them against the world. Black man, white man, black man, white man. Don was always spouting some bullshit that the white motherfuckers were no good and that they were out to kill us all. Mike actually started believing some of Don's talk. Don played into that stuff. He contaminated Mike's whole barometer. Anybody could have looked at Don with his hair and his big mouth and his ghetto fabulous flamboyant style and seen that he was just a sick motherfucker. But Mike was confused back then. All joking aside, if Cuss had been alive, he would have gone with King to promote Mike. Cuss hated Bob Arum, King's rival. Mike doesn't know why. He didn't think Arum was worse than Don, but Cuss told Mike nobody could be worse than Arum. Mike then got a lot of flack for going with Don. Mike was with his friend Brian Hamill at Columbus one night. Robert De Niro was there, sitting at a table, and Brian and Mike were standing near him. Brian was going off on Mike about signing with King. What the fuck are you getting involved with Don King for? He wasn't saying it for Robert De Niro's benefit, but Robert De Niro could hear every word. Do you know how many black fighters he's robbed? Do you know the history? Mike said, "Brian, I've got so much money. I don't give a fuck." And Mike didn't back then. He didn't know how long that ride was going to last. Mike was just living his life day by day. But he knew that he loved being champion, and he felt that nobody could do that job better than him. Mike would destroy anything in front of him. If you were in the same occupation, and you weighed the same as Mike, well, to him, you're another victim. Mike's whole job was to hurt people. Jim and Bill tried to tone that down, but Don was with the program. So when Mike started hanging out with Don, boom, the whole public perception of him changed. Now, he was a bad guy. In October of 1988, Don took Mike to Venezuela for the WBA convention. They went to Mexico for the christening of Julio Chavez's son. That trip was a real revelation for Mike. They took a day trip to the pyramids, and this little kid came up to Mike begging. The guides they were with said, "No, Mike, don't give him any money." But how could he? $100 was nothing to Mike, but it meant everything to the kid. So Mike gave him some money, and the kid was so appreciative. Mike was thinking, wow, this is a good kid. And Mike went to touch the kid's hair, and it felt hard as a rock. It felt like he hadn't washed his hair in years. You could have hurt someone with that hair. Then they went to Cooligan, and Mike saw more kids begging. He bought clothes for this one kid, and the next thing you knew, the kid was bringing around 3 more friends, and then 20 more of his cousins were coming by for clothes. That's why Mike liked that one kid. He never came by himself. He always brought his friends and relatives, and every time, Mike bought them all stuff. It was just like in Brooklyn when Mike bought sneakers for the street kids. These Mexican kids had never left Culiacan, and he dressed them, and they were all hanging out. Mike had so much money, and the clothes that he was buying were so cheap. You just knew you were going to hell if you didn't spend money on those children. By the time Mike left, they had a crew of over 50 kids that were dressed sharp. Before they went to Mexico, Mike had such a big chip on his shoulder. He'd never known anyone poorer than him. He couldn't imagine anyone else in the world being poorer than him. He was blown away by the poverty in Mexico. Mike was actually mad at them for being poorer than he had been because he couldn't feel sorry for himself anymore. More than anything, Mike's successes stemmed from his shame about being poor. The shame of being poor gave him more pain than anything else in his life. So many of Mike's problems stemmed from thinking he deserved shit after being so poverty-stricken growing up. Cuss was always trying to get Mike to transcend himself and separate himself from his ego, get him out of his own head, but of course it was hard. One of the reasons that Mike didn't think he was going to live long was because he thought he was the baddest man in the world, both in the arena and out on the streets. When you add the alcohol to the giant ego, anything could happen. It felt like he was always on a mission. But what was Mike looking for? What was the problem? Mike was always mad at the world. He always felt empty. Even after Mexico, he had a chip on his shoulder about being poor, his mother passing away, that he had no family life. Being the champion of the world just accelerated and intensified those feelings. Then Mike created that Iron Mike persona, that monster, and the media picked up on it, and the whole world was afraid of that guy. The guy who could make women leave their husbands for a night and cheat. That image of being the big bad motherfucker was really intoxicating, but inside, Mike was still just a little boy, the scared kid who didn't want to get picked on, but he had to play that role. Mike didn't know what else to do. With all this drinking and partying, Mike's weight shot up to 255 that December. His next fight was with Frank Bruno, but that wasn't until the end of February 1989. Then Mike found himself without a trainer. At this point in time, Kevin Rooney was always in the papers. He was talking negatively about Mike, saying that he didn't know what he was doing. Kevin was also very anti-Don King, and he was always pro-Bill Caton. Mike, at the time, thought that his hatred for Don was blinding him. Kevin really fired himself. He didn't want to be with him. He wanted the whole Caton team back. Mike was going to hire him back at the same price, but Bill Caton didn't want it. And then he sued Don King. So Mike then hired his Catskill roommate, Jay Bright, to be his new trainer. Mike wanted Jay to get some money because he was part of Cuss's family upstate. Mike also hired Aaron Snowell, who claimed he had trained Tim Witherspoon. Tim later told Mike that Snowell was just his running partner who had carried the bucket into the ring. But Mike didn't care. He was a pugilistic god in his eyes. Mike's opponents should die with fright at the thought of fighting him. That was his mentality. Before they started training, Mike had some legal matters to resolve. In January 1989, a girl filed $1 million suit against him for grabbing the buttocks at Bentley's, a nightclub just blocks from his apartment in Manhattan. Mike was with one of his friends at the time, who told him to say that he didn't grab her buttocks, but that he was behind her and he fell into her as he tried to break his fall. His friend Anthony always came up with plausible deniability, and he would often take the fall for Mike. Another time, they were at Bentley's and Mike grabbed some girl's ass, and when she turned round, Anthony piped in, No, that was me, baby. I'm sorry, I thought you were my ex-girl." But the first girl was taking Mike to court, and she planned on having a friend who was there with her to testify against him. Mike had seen the friend in court the day before she was supposed to testify against him, so Mike went looking for her, and amazingly enough, he found her out that night with a friend of his. "Hey, you're the girl from the case," Mike said. "Don't you get in my face," she replied. "Hey, I don't want to get in your face. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at your friend. I didn't do anything to her." Mike figured in his head that if he had sex with this girl, she couldn't testify against him the next day. "Hey, it's no problem, sister. Why don't you and me go for a ride in the Rolls?" His strategy worked. The girl didn't testify. In January, Mike had also had to appear in court for a deposition in connection with Caton's suit versus Don King. Thomas Puccio, a famous attorney, was Caton's man. He asked Mike about the Spinks fight payment, and Mike told him that he couldn't recall if he had been paid. When Puccio showed him that he had been paid his full $12 million, Mike couldn't recall what he did with the money. Mike didn't even have his own accountant at the time. Mike was just using dons. He didn't have anyone to tell him how to protect himself. All his friends were dependent on him. He had the biggest loser friends in the history of loser friends. But the deposition got interesting when Puccio asked Mike about Jimmy and the revised managerial contract Mike had signed right before he died. Mike said, "I had total trust, implicity, totally, with every soul of my body in Jim. I signed that agreement because Jimmy asked me to sign it. I always trusted Jimmy. I never believed me listening to Jimmy would all come down to this, and being here facing you. I didn't understand Caton was my manager because Jimmy, by some means, I can't understand why Jimmy had me sign this. Like I said, I trusted him and I signed it. I wanted to fight in the glory of Jim. I love Jim. He could have informed me about Mr. Caton being my manager, which he didn't." Mike's own litigation with Robin was also still in the courts, but that didn't keep them from seeing each other. Whenever he was in LA, Mike stopped by for a booty call. He once drove up to a house in his Lamborghini. Mike knocked on the door, and there was no one there. It was odd, so he went back to his car when Mike spotted Robin pulling up in her nice white BMW convertible. He should have recognised it. Mike had bought the motherfucker. Great, I can still get my quickie in, he thought. But then he spotted a white silhouette with flowing blonde hair in the passenger seat. It was probably one of her girlfriends from their head of class, but Mike looked closer, and he saw that he was a dude. They pulled up and got out of the car, and Mike saw that the guy was none other than Brad Pitt. When Brad Pitt saw him standing there in front of the house, well, you only had to see the look on Brad's face. He looked like he was ready to receive his last rites. Plus, he also looked stoned out of his gourd. Then he went all pre-Matrix on Mike. "Dude, don't strike me, don't strike me. We were just going over some lines. She was talking about you the whole time." "Please, Michael, please don't do anything," Robin was crying. She was scared to death. But Mike wasn't going to beat no one up. He wasn't trying to go jail for her. He was just trying to get in some humps before the divorce. "Come back later, Mike," she said. "I'll be home. Come back later." It was what it was. Brad beat Mike to the punch that day, so he went back the next day. That wasn't the last time Mike saw Robin. While he was training for the Bruno fight, Robin was shooting some B-movie in Vancouver. She kept calling Mike for help, saying she was being stalked. Mike wanted to be by her side to protect her. He ditched his security team and immediately flew up there. Mike was grateful to get out of town because he was tired of training anyway. Mike was in full romantic mode, so he walked up to the hotel, carrying a big bottle of Dom Perignon. Suddenly, he was surrounded by a swarm of reporters and camera crews. Robin Givens had set him up. She had told the media that he was the one stalking her. They were swarming him, asking him why he was stalking her. So Mike acted on instinct. He transformed his champagne bottle into a bludgeon to escape with. Of course, he scared a few reporters and broke a really expensive camera in doing so, which set him back a few pennies. Mike spent the night with Robin, but he was so disgusted by her behaviour that he left the next morning. That was the official end of his relationship with her. Their divorce was finalised on February the 14th. Robin got some cash money and got to keep all the jewellery he had bought her, which was worth a fortune. Ruth Roper took some of Robin's money and opened up an indie film production company in New York. Robin also tried to keep his Lamborghini. She took that car and put it in a garage, and then had someone put cement blocks into the ground in front of the garage door so they couldn't get it out. But that was no problem for Howard. He hired some private investigators who were ex-Mossad agents, and they had the car out in 20 minutes without waking anybody up. Mike was finally free of Robin, but instead of being elated, he was really down. He didn't want to be married to her anymore, but he felt humiliated by the whole process. Mike felt like half a person. He had endured the dark side of love, betrayal, and he was ashamed because it had played out in front of millions of people. This was the first time Mike had made himself vulnerable to someone else. Here was someone he would have died for, and now he didn't even care if she died. That's how love can change in an instant. But it was time to go back to fighting for Mike. The entire boxing industry was waiting for Mike's next fight. They had brought the whole entertainment base back to the sport. Mike's fights were sold out the minute they were announced. Everybody was going to Vegas to hang out at the MGM Grand. The place was packed like sardines when they were there. The word was out that Mike would go to the mall at the MGM and spend $250,000 the night before the fight. So there were all these Mike Tyson lookalikes there. They'd do his walk. Mike was in the room, sleeping, and there were all these Tyson sightings with all the Tyson lookalikes. Every high roller from around the world was there. Billionaires, actors, actresses, hustlers. They were all there. But Mike was in no shape, especially mentally, to fight. And Bruno really should have kicked his ass. Mike just didn't care anymore. He was tired of fighting. He didn't have Cuss's system in his head. But Mike put up a good front. At one of the first press conferences before the fight, he tried to sound upbeat. He said, "I'm happy to be back. I've gone through a lot of distractions recently, but I think it's really good for someone to go through something like this. Actually, I've been through this pain before, but this time it was publicised. I know I learned a great deal about myself and how to deal with adversity. My main objective now is to get back on top. It doesn't matter if I'm famous or recognisable. You can't be on top if you don't perform, and I plan on performing again and getting back on top." But the reporters just wanted to know about his storybook romance with Robin and what happened. Hey, I went through a stage, fell in love, and I might fall in love again, but not the same way. Mike showed a little more bravado as the fight approached. He said, "People say poor guy about me. That insults me. I despise sympathy. So I screwed up and I made some mistakes. Poor guy sounds like I'm a victim. There's nothing poor about me." Mike didn't train particularly hard for this fight. Mike had sparred with Bruno when he was 16 at Cuss's, and Mike had gotten the best of him then. He had no strategy to fight him. Mike knew he could pick off his jab and that Bruno couldn't hurt Mike with his power punches. At the weigh-in, Bruno attempted to stare Mike down, so Mike pulled his shorts down and showed him his pubic hair. When the fight began, Mike felt a little rusty, but he was punching pretty hard. He dropped Bruno with the first punch. Then, he got a little reckless trying to finish him off, and he misanticipated Bruno's speed, and Bruno hit Mike with a left hook and a short right. People made a big deal about the fact that Mike was wobbled with the punches. But that wasn't so. It was just a zabang, and then Mike was back in charge. Mike almost finished Bruno off at the very end of the second round. After that, he held Mike after every punishing blow Mike got off. With a minute to go in the fifth, Mike wobbled Bruno and then spent the next 40 seconds stalking him. Mike was ready to go, and he got Bruno against the ropes and landed a devastating right uppercut, and Richard Steele stopped the fight. Bruno was out on his feet. In the post-fight interview, Mike lauded over his opponents. How dare they challenge me with their primitive skills? He was actually quoting Apocalypse from the X-Men. Really, he was just a big kid quoting a comic book. He was then scheduled again to fight in July, but HBO wanted to sign him to a lifetime contract. Mike must have felt like a constant slave. They needed him just like the head slave on a plantation. Just imagine, the suits were fighting over Mike to rip his soul apart. Mike then started training for the fight in Ohio. He had bought a house right near Don's. On May 31st, the HBO guys went out to Don's to talk about the proposed deal. Mike didn't show up. He had been partying the night before. Mike's next fight in Atlantic City on July 21st. Part of the preparation for the fight was to take an AIDS test. Because boxers often bleed, they were trying to protect the referees, the cornerman, and the other boxer. Mike was scared to take the test. He was always sleeping with nasty girls, so he thought he might have had AIDS. They came to test him, and he refused. "Take the fucking test, Mike," Don said. "You don't got that shit?" "How do you know? What symptoms show that I don't have it?" Mike said. What Don didn't know was that a childhood friend of his had died of AIDS. His friend and Mike both had unprotected sex with the same girl, and then the girl died of AIDS as well. They used to go to this one club, and the bouncer knew that Mike was close to the girl, and whenever he'd show up at the club, he'd just look at Mike. "Yo, Mike, how you doing? You look like you've been losing weight." Mike just knew that, behind his back, they were telling people he was sick with AIDS. At the time, AIDS was everywhere in their lives, and one of his childhood role models had contracted it. They called him Pop. They didn't even know his real name. He was a flamboyant gay guy about 5 years older than him. He was a big-time moneymaker because he dressed immaculately with big furs and rings and diamonds so nobody in the stores would think he was stealing anything. Pop would only hang out with women when he was getting down. He didn't like bringing Mike around because they would wake the place up. So, Mike's next fight was scheduled against Carl the Truth Williams. He was a 12-1 underdog, and Mike didn't think he posed any real threat to him. To stir up some interest in the fight and to make some quick cash, Don King had set up a 900 phone line. When you called in, you were supposed to get exclusive information about Mike for your money. It was really just a tape recording of Don interviewing Mike. If you beat Carl Williams, who will you fight next? I don't know, Mike answered. And people paid for that. The fight itself didn't even last as long as that 900 phone call. Williams kept throwing his left jab, and Mike pinched to the side and simultaneously threw a left hook that landed square on Williams' jaw. He went down and got up, leaning against the ropes for balance. The ref asked him a question and didn't like what he heard, so he stopped the fight. The fight had lasted 2 seconds longer than the Michael Spinks fight. Mike was surprised that the ref stopped it. He didn't think Williams was hurt that bad, but as he told Larry Merchant after the fight, he would have been all over him. Mike was always the most dangerous when he had someone hurt. Merchant asked Mike who he would fight next, and he threw out a list of names including Evander Holyfield, James Buster Douglas, and Michael Dokes. Mike's response, "Come one, come all. No one can get close to me. I'm the best fighter in the world. Don told me if I knock this guy out, he's paying me $100,000. Don squeezed his way into the camera frame and Mike said, "When is this going to happen?" At the post-press conference, Don said, "Oh yes, Mike got excited. He said, my church could use that money." They collected that cash and put it in the bag, and Craig Boogie and Mike went to Mount Vernon directly after the fight to hang out with Heavy D and LB. They hung out at Heavy's house with his parents for a few hours, then they went to the city to spend that money at the churches of their choice. First Columbus, and then every club from Harlem to downtown. Mike stayed in New York partying for a month after that fight. Mike really went over the top in the years they had Team Tyson. He wasn't operating on a logical basis in his mind. Mike truly thought he was a barbarian champion. He said, "If you don't like what I say, I will destroy you, tear your soul apart." Mike at this point was one mean son of a bitch. One of his bodyguards actually began to think his name was Motherfucker, because all he'd hear was, "Motherfucker, get me this. Let's go, motherfucker." It was a wild camp in Ohio, and everybody was getting their asses kicked around. Mike was that kind of ruler. Nobody was getting fired, he was just kicking ass. Mike remembered kicking Don King in the head so hard that he said it looked like dust came out of his afro. One Sunday, Mike told Don King, "Man, I ain't never seen $1 million in cash. You better go and get me $1 million. "But the bank is closed, Mike," Don said. "You got connections. Go open the bank and get my $1 million. I want to see it in cash." "Don't do that, Mike. Don's going to get angry and fuck you up," everybody would say. "You all afraid of him?" Mike said. Bam! Then he kicked Don King in the head. Now, there's a story that we've pulled out of one of the Mike Tyson books. Many Mike Tyson books out there, but there's a story, and bear with me, I'm going to tell the story because I feel it's one of those wild stories that you don't hear that often about Mike Tyson. And he goes, one day Ali, Muhammad Ali that is, and a few other people were at Don's house in Vegas. Now, Mike used to hear stories that Ali and Larry Holmes and a lot of other boxers were scared of Don King. He respected them and wanted them to know that Don was nobody to be scared of. Mike would say deplorable things about him in front of everyone just to prove how worthless Don was. Mike don't know that if it was real or if it was just motivation for whooping Don's ass. Mike was a young, immature kid then, and he just felt like doing it. His friends, Rory and John, would come to Mike and say, "Mike, listen, the man's 60-something years old. You keep hitting him, you're going to give him brain damage. He told us to call you and let you know you ain't going to come around if you keep hitting him, so just chill out." So, of course, Mike had to chill out. They all thought Mike was crazy. He wasn't training, he was just partying too much. And then, having barely trained, he'd go fight a guy and still knock them out. Mike, for that moment of time, might have actually been a little crazy. He was so far away from the person he once was. Mike really believed that he was the baddest man on the planet. Mike was kicking Don King's ass, thinking he was John Gotti. Don used to try and get him to go see a doctor. Don would say, "Mike, you need to go and see a psychiatrist, brother. Something ain't right here." Don got Mike to go and see Dr. Alvin Poissant, Bill Cosby's guy, a distinguished professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So he asked Mike what his problem was, and Mike started saying crazy stuff to the doctor. Fuck it. I don't care about living and dying. I don't give a fuck. The guy was so gross and regal, he made Mike sick to his stomach. The doctor got away though. He ran out of the house and never came back. The Boxing Illustrated magazine published an article. Is Mike Tyson becoming the most unpopular heavyweight in history? Dave Anderson from the New York Times also wrote a column. Who is out there to stop Tyson? The press were now turning on Mike, but he loved it. He was such an irritant at this time. He needed more people to fight. They despised him at this point. He'd spit at them, he'd yell at them, and that's just who he was. Mike would tell them, you just say something back, you could sue me, but you're going to have to use that money to buy yourself a fucking wheelchair with the fancy motors and toilet because that's what you're going to be going around in. Don King had signed Mike now to fight Razor Ruddock in his next fight. The hotels in the States were interested in paying big fees for that fight. Donald Trump felt burnt by Mike's last quick KO over Carl the Truth Williams, so Don found some guys in Edmonton, Canada to pay $2.6 million site fees. Mike was scheduled to fight on November the 18th, but after hanging out in New York, Mike went to LA and resumed his non-stop partying. He wasn't too interested in fighting Ruddock. Mike had seen him fight Michael Weaver, and he boxed brilliantly against him, but he never fought like that again. He turned into a knockout artist. In his fight before he was scheduled to fight Mike, he'd been floored in the second round by Bone Crusher Smith, and then he got up to knock him out impressively in the 7th. Mike started training for the fight in Vegas in September, but his heart just wasn't in it. He didn't want to fight anymore. Mike moved camp to Edmonton in mid-October, but he wasn't in training. He was just sleeping with women. He didn't even want to leave his room. Mike got his friends to grab a random girl and bring her back to the room. He didn't care how she looked or what her name was. When they were done, she'd leave and another random girl would come. Mike finally told Don King to make some excuse and postpone the fight. They used his bronchitis. Mike could have easily fought with it, but when a doctor would see his x-rays, he'd get alarmed. They called off the fight on October the 26th and flew back to Vegas. Don had found some doctor to certify that Mike had contracted pleurisy. Of course, Mike hadn't contracted pleurisy, but it was all some big scam to get him out of the fight because he wasn't prepared. Don then started looking for an easier matchup for Mike. He decided to take him to Japan in January to fight Buster Douglas, who he thought would be a pushover. Then Don struck a deal with Evander Holyfield's people and set up a match with him in June of 1990 at the Trump Plaza. Mike walked away with $25 million for that fight. Bill Caton, who was still his manager of record, was happy to hear that. So Mike threw himself back into partying. He had no fight scheduled now until February 1990. In November, Mike got to meet some of the greatest celebrities imaginable when he participated in a celebration of the 60th anniversary of Sammy Davis Jr.'s showbiz career. Mike, of course, had a great time. He talked to George Burns and Milton Berle about Fanny Bryce and Ruby Keeler and Al Jolson. George was so old, he'd actually worked with Fanny. Mike hung out with the whole Rat Pack. Those guys really liked him a lot. But meeting all these guys, well, you couldn't hold a candle for Mike to meeting some of his boxing idols. Of any celebrity he met around that time, Mike was most in awe of meeting Max Schmeling. He was in his mid-80s when Mike met him. It was fascinating to talk to him about boxing. They talked about Jack Dempsey and Mickey Walker. He told Mike that Joe Louis was the greatest fighter and also the greatest man. When he heard that Joe Louis was bankrupt, he left Germany and went to Harlem to look for Joe. Can you imagine an older white guy going all in the clubs in Harlem looking for Joe Louis? By the time Mike met him, Schmeling had become a billionaire. He owned all the rights to Pepsi in Germany. But what was so fascinating about him was that he still loved boxing. Everywhere he went, he'd take copies of his old fight films with him. Mike loved old fighters. When he learned that Joey Maxim, the former light heavyweight champ, was working as a greeter at a Vegas hotel, Mike went to visit him every other week and talked to him about his career. He was so mad that he was never introduced at ringside at any of the big fights at the Hilton, so Mike made sure they did that from then on in. Mike never looked at guys like him as being bums or down on the luck. He looked at him as being bigger than him. It wasn't like Mike was some big shot doing him a favour coming in, Mike was actually in awe to be there with him. He was just so happy to see him and touch him. When he went home that first night, Mike said he cried. On January the 8th, 1990, Mike got aboard a plane to fly to Tokyo, kicking and screaming. He didn't want to fight. All Mike was interested in doing at this point was partying and meeting women. By the time they left, Mike had put on 30 pounds. Don was so worried about his weight that he offered Mike a bonus if he could make his usual weight when the fight would happen a month later. Mike actually didn't consider James Buster Douglas that much of a challenge. He didn't even bother watching any of his fights on video. Mike, at this point, had easily beaten everybody who had knocked him out. Mike saw Buster Douglas fight for the ESPN Championship when he was on the undercard, and Douglas got beat by Jesse Ferguson, who Mike had knocked out in his first fight on ABC. Mike felt like the heroes, Mickey Walker and Harry Greb. Mike had read that Greb was so arrogant he'd tell his opponents that he hadn't trained because you're not worth me sweating for. So Mike followed his lead. Mike didn't train at all for the fight. Anthony Pitts was there with Mike, and he would get up early in the morning and run with Mike's sparring partner Greg Page. But Mike didn't feel like it. Anthony would tell Mike that he'd see Buster out there digging in with his army boots on, schnosticles hanging off his nose, getting in his run. Mike couldn't eat since he was overweight, and Mike wanted to lose weight and win the bonus from Don. So he drank the soup that was supposed to burn off fat. And then Mike had the cleaning ladies for the main course. It was ironic because you'd go to Japan and the women seemed so shy and introverted, but fortunately Mike ran into some unconventional Japanese ladies. Mike was seeing this young Japanese girl who he had met for the last time he was in Japan for the Tony Tubbs fight. Robin would go out shopping and Mike would go upstairs in the stairwell with her. He had to do the same thing this time as well. There were too many people on his floor, and Mike didn't want Don or Rory or John or even Anthony to know his business. They might have scared her. She was very shy around people. In the 2 years since Mike had seen her, she had matured a great deal. Whilst out there in Japan, when he was supposed to be preparing for Douglas, instead he was fornicating, partying, but every once in a while he did actually show up to work out and spar. Mike was actually sparring with Greg Page 10 days before the fight, and he walked right into a right hook and went down. "What the fuck are you doing?" Greg asked him later. A few days later, Don opened up one of Mike's sparring sessions to the public for $60 per person. Mike never saw any of that money, of course. At the time, Mike didn't even know he was charging people. They were supposed to spar for 2 rounds, but Mike looked so bad that Aaron Snowell and Jay Bright stopped it after 1 round and closed the session. Don was pissed off. He wanted to make a buck. He had no idea Mike was so out of shape. Don knew nothing about fighting. He couldn't tell the difference between a guy in shape or out of shape. He didn't even know how to tie a boxing glove. The day before the fight, Mike weighed in at 220.5 pounds, his heaviest fighting weight to date, but Mike still got his bonus. The day before the fight, Mike also had 2 maids at the same time, and then 2 more girls one at a time the night before the fight. Mike just wasn't following the story, but apparently, Buster Douglas had a lot of motivation to do well in this fight. In July of 1989, he had been born again, and then his wife left him. His baby mama got a terminal disease, and early in January, while he was in camp, his mother passed away. Mike didn't know any of that, but he also didn't care. HBO was making a big deal about Douglas fighting for his mother, but Mike's arrogance at the time was such that he would have said to Douglas that he was going to join her that night. The actual fight itself took place at 9 AM because of the time difference back in the United States. Half of the arena's 63,000 seats were empty. Don didn't promote this one really well. As soon as Mike got with him, everything just sunk and he was a dark cloud. Also, it wasn't the usual Tyson going into the ring. It was obvious to anyone who was watching that Mike really didn't want to be there. Now, before I get into the fight descriptions, as a side note, if you do want to listen to any more specifically on Tyson versus Douglas, we did do a legendary night about 4 or 5 years ago. Please do go back and listen to that. But as the fight started, Mike got underway and he just fought horribly. He was punching as hard as shit because he knew if he caught Douglas weren't going to get up. He didn't care how big he was, but the problem was he was hardly throwing. It was the least amount of punches Mike ever threw in a fight. Douglas used his jab and his reach to throw Mike off his game, and then when Mike tried to throw body shots, Douglas just held him. He fought really well that night, but Mike was an easy target for him. He wasn't moving his head at all. Douglas wasn't intimidated by Mike. In fact, he was the one punching after the bell and on breaks. He was fighting dirty. But of course that can be part of boxing, and everyone does that at some point. After the third round, Mike went back to his corner, and it was obvious that Aaron and Jay, well, they were in way over their heads. "You're not closing the gap," Aaron said. "You've got to get inside, you're flat-footed in there." "No fucking shit. Why don't you try getting on the inside," Mike said. The guy had a 12-inch reach advantage on Mike. "Get back to what you know," Jay said. "Do it. Let it go." Of course, that's easy to say when you're not getting punched. Mike just kept staring at the floor. Douglas then rocked him in the 4th and the 5th rounds, and during the 5th round, Mike's eye began to swell. But when Mike went back to the corner, they didn't even have an end swell to keep his eye open. Mike couldn't believe it when they filled what looked like an extra-large condom with ice and water and held it to his eye. Mike was exhausted by the 6th round. His left eye was totally shut, but Buster looked tired too, especially when the 7th round began. But Mike couldn't get to him. In the 8th, Douglas wobbled Mike and had him against the ropes in the last 20 seconds. Mike was looking for a one-punch knockout by then, but Mike was still rocked by Douglas's punches. He couldn't focus, but he saw an opening. For the whole fight, Douglas had eluded Mike whenever he saw openings, and Mike couldn't bridge the gap. But by then, Douglas was tired, and he too couldn't move as much. So Mike threw his trademark right uppercut, and Douglas went down. Then, Mike got screwed. The timekeeper was Japanese, and the referee was Mexican, and they spoke different languages and couldn't coordinate the count. When the ref was saying 5, Douglas had actually been on the canvas for 8 seconds. So, he got a long count. Mike had to take the short end of the stick. Unfortunately, that's just part of boxing, but Mike thinks he was really screwed. Mike didn't want to take anything away from Buster. He had so much courage and guts that night. Mike had hit him with an awesome shot. Anybody else's head would have been sent to the space shuttle if they'd experienced that punch. Mike was so spent that he couldn't follow up on the knockdown the next round, and Douglas came back strong. When the 10th began, Mike hit Douglas with a straight right to the jaw, but then he unleashed a barrage of punches at Mike's head, starting with a right uppercut. Mike was so numb that he didn't even feel the punches, but he could hear them. His equilibrium was shot, and then Mike went down. When Mike hit the canvas, his mouthpiece came out, and as the ref was counting, Mike was trying to stumble to his feet and grab the mouthpiece at the same time. Mike was operating on pure instinct. He was totally out of it. The ref hugged Mike after he counted to 10. Mike walked back to his corner, totally dazed. Mike was chewing on his mouthpiece, but he didn't even know what it was. "What happened?" Mike asked his corner. "The ref counted you out, champ," Aaron said. Mike knew it was inevitable. He was fucked from early on that fight. Mike didn't do the post-fight interview with HBO. Mike's head was still ringing. He must have at least had one concussion. Within minutes, Don had organised a meeting with the WBC and WBA officials. Then he called his own press conference. "The first knockout obliterated the second knockout," he ranted. Jose Suleiman, the president of the WBC, suspended recognition of anyone as champion because the ref had failed to take the count from the timekeeper. The referee admitted that he had made a mistake. Suleiman immediately called for a rematch. By then, Mike was conscious enough to join the press conference. He was wearing sunglasses to hide his mangled eye and holding a white compress to his swollen face. He said, "You guys know me for years. I never gripe or bitch. I knocked him out before he had me knocked out. I want to be the champ of the world. That's what all young boys want." After the press conference, he went back to his hotel room. There was no maid there. It was weird, him not being the heavyweight champion of the world any longer. But in Mike's mind, it was a fluke. It was a long flight back from Tokyo, and Mike's eye was still absolutely mangled, so he was wearing those big dark sunglasses that Anthony Pitts gave him. During the flight, Mike talked to Anthony. "So I guess you're going to leave me now," he said. In his own mind, Mike was saying, "I'm doomed. My world is over." "Mike, I'll never leave you," Anthony said. "You can't fire me, and I can't quit, so we stuck together. You watch. You'll be all right when the swelling goes down." Mike went straight to Camille's house when they landed. He goes right back to the basics. home to his mum's. The next morning, Anthony got up at 7 a.m. and then they went downstairs. Mike was already doing sit-ups and push-ups. "Oh, now you want to train? After the motherfucking fight," Anthony said. "Man, I'm just trying to stay focused," he replied. Mike talked to Camille later. She had been at the fight, watching from the front row, and she thought that Mike looked like he was in a daze. "You didn't throw any vicious punches," Camille said. "You looked like you wanted to lose. Maybe you just got tired of it." She was probably right. Mike believed in the Cuss theory, that the only thing wrong with defeat is if nothing is learned from it. Cuss always used to tell Mike that fighting is a metaphor for life. It doesn't matter if you're losing, it's what you do after you lose. Are you going to stay down or get back up and try it again? Later, Mike would tell people that his best fight ever was the Douglas fight because it proved that he could take a beating like a man and rebound. So, Mike hung out in Catskill and played with his pigeons and then read about his heroes, how Tony Zale had come back from Rocky Graziano, how Joe Louis had come back to demolish Max Schmeling, how Muhammad Ali came back from exile, how Sugar Ray Robinson just bridled at seeing the word former in conjunction with his name. Mike's narcissism started working again, and he started thinking that he was from these guys' bloodline. Mike knew that it was inevitable that he would get those belts back. Mike was going to go away to some destitute place and learn this masterful trade. He was going to come back, and in his mind, he was going to come back and he was going to be better. So it's at this point, ladies and gentlemen, that we pause for the end of part 6 of the Mike Tyson career profile. This episode has been a little bit different. You know, during the course of going through some of those fights in between, there's been a lot more focus on what's been going on outside of the ring as opposed to what's going on in the ring. And the reason for that is really to project across how things really were outside of the ring for Mike Tyson. I mean, from afar, we all sit there and say, yeah, Robin Givens, it was the downfall of Mike Tyson. Jim Jacobs dying was the downfall of Mike Tyson. Kevin Rooney leaving was the downfall of Mike Tyson. People have their own theories, they have their own reasons and reasonings behind why Mike Tyson imploded. But when you get to hear more about it, more about the pressures of fame, things that Cuss had tried to instill in him early on, he couldn't maintain it. The pressure was just too much for him. He'd give in to those demons, and he succumbed to the lifestyle that was there. And ultimately, that's what was the downfall of Mike Tyson at this point. Getting to that Buster Douglas fight, not training properly for it, getting dropped in sparring. Buster Douglas had the motivation. It was a one-of-a-kind night, 42-1. 42-1 underdog Buster Douglas was that night, and he upset the odds. Okay, you could say that in the 8th round, Mike Tyson should have won the fight. In history, in retrospect, yeah, he probably should have done. But history tells us something different now, doesn't it? Buster Douglas beat the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, caused one of the biggest sporting upsets in history. And for Mike, his ego was still there. His ego was well and truly still there. The narcissism in him was still there. He wanted to return to the ring and win back the heavyweight championship of the world. But of course, as we go into part 7 of the Mike Tyson career profile, we'll hear more about his comeback. And of course, one of the most infamous nights of Mike Tyson's life that would lead to a spell in prison and away from the boxing ring. I hope you've enjoyed this part of the Mike Tyson career profile. If you have, if you've got any thoughts and feelings, any comments, anything you want to add, please do let us know. You can comment on Spotify. You can comment on any available podcasting app that has the comments facility on there. If you've listened to it via the YouTube channel, always drop a comment in below at any point of the episode and let me know what your thoughts are about what we've said and what we've talked about and the stories that we've told in the episode. I really do hope that you have enjoyed the episode. It has been a really long career profile, of course. We're going into the 7th part next, but we've got so much more still to tell. A couple of more parts left before we come to an end of Mike Tyson's career profile, and I hope so far that it has been enjoyable. A big thanks to those that have been commenting and letting me know what you feel about the episodes. It really, really helps. It does help us form how we would take our storytelling podcast going forward, so thank you so much for that. Again, I want to thank Hassan for putting together the episode. It's a big help for putting together these episodes and getting the information together and telling the stories from not always the same perspectives and having different perspectives on things. I think the Tyson story's been told many times before, but I feel like we're telling it in a different format, in a different way. We're telling you stories that maybe you've not heard before. And some of these stories could just be hearsay Chinese whispers, but they have come from legitimate sources. So we hope that you can take some of these on board and, you can make what you want of them and interpret them how you wish. But they are stories that I've never heard, so they were interesting to stick into the episodes. Again, if you've enjoyed it, do let me know. If you continue to support on social media, please do drop comments, do share the posts, do like and comment and share, do all the necessaries on social media, because it is truly, truly helping get exposure to the world about the podcast and the podcast network, and we really do appreciate that support. We will be back very, very soon, a little bit sooner than the break between part 5 and part 6. So part 6 will be out, and then part 7 will follow very, very shortly afterwards. And then, of course, parts 8 and 9, and 9 being the final part of the Tyson saga. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sign off by saying thank you for listening to this episode, the Mike Tyson Career Profile, part number 6 on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.